Tanake Harurera. My name is Brittany Schulman. I'm Senior Vice President of Programs with Native Americans in Philanthropy, and very excited to share this last season, the last episode of the year. It is my joy to welcome you into or back into this space. Wherever you are joining us from the conversation, we're honored for your presence. Our member education session series began just over 1 year ago. 2023 has been marked with the first full calendar year of these MES sessions. We've approached great conversations on a variety of Indigenous experiences, topics related to philanthropic work, and my personal highlight, the Indian Child Welfare Act, and how that decision is continuing to impact our communities. To finish this year out, today's session will be focusing on the importance of partnering across the field. Impactful philanthropic work challenges existing systems to create new long-term solutions. These solutions are often complex answers that require input and production from many different sources. Historically, philanthropic and nonprofit sectors have excluded Native nations and communities of color. Native Americans in Philanthropy is committed to rectifying this exclusion and promoting equitable and effective philanthropy in Native communities. Collaborative efforts with partners and allies in this sector play a pivotal role in fulfilling this mission and creating solutions that will sustain themselves for the next 7 generations. Today, we'll get to hear from 2 of our esteemed NAP partners, their imperative to executing this work. They will be discussing the purpose of their organizations, their work, both inside and outside of Indian country, and the internal work required to begin embarking on their own efforts with NAP. We'll also be joined by Native American and Philanthropy's own CEO, Erik Stegman, as he discusses his experiences and the relationality embedded in effective partnerships. Before this, though, I would like to welcome today's moderator, my sister, Steph Poston. Steph serves as president and CEO of Poston and Associates and has been an excellent resource and partner throughout this entire member education series thus far. Steph, welcome back.
Thanks, Brittany. Welcome, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. We're looking forward to finishing 2023 strong with Native Americans in Philanthropy, with the title of this session being Partnering Across the Field. Super excited to be here, a great panel in front of us. I like to have them introduce themselves. And as just a reminder, I'm Steph Poston, and I'm from the Pueblo of Sandia, and we're going to get started. So the first one up, I'd like to invite Lisa up and give a brief intro. Lisa?
Thanks, Steph. Very, very happy to be here today, finishing out the year strong, as you say. I'm Lisa Jaguzny, and I'm the Director of Programs for the Biodiversity Funders Group. Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks, Lisa. Next up is Shannon. Shannon, if you'll come up.
Hi, I'm Shannon Rudisill, and I'm the Executive Director of Early Childhood Funders Collaborative. It's great to be here.
Thanks, Shannon. And the next one up is the CEO of Native Americans in Philanthropy, Erik.
Good afternoon. It's such a pleasure to be here. A warm welcome to everyone. Just want to thank you again for being part of our community on these programs. This has really been a joy to see the learning going on throughout the year. And I affectionately call this NAP TV with my team. So excited to be back on today.
Yeah, I love the NAP TV thing. I'm like, welcome to NAP Studios, right? Great. So the first question up, and I like this to be really conversational and really encourage that type of platform. So the first question up, and I'm going to go ahead and direct that to Lisa, is if you could describe the purpose and vision of your organization.
You mean it's not obvious in the title? You should have heard our prior name. We used to be the Consultative Group on Biological Diversity. Is that any more opaque? I'm the Director of Programs for an organization that's been around about 35 years that seeks to bring our philanthropic members together around issues protecting nature and biodiversity. That obviously takes a much broader lens depending on what we're talking about, and I'll share more about that later today. But we are a membership organization that convenes around learning experiences, webinars like today. We have annual meetings in all sorts of different topic areas, but we're on the smaller side. We're about 75 private foundations and then a host of other partners. So a little bit of a narrower scope than probably a lot of the PSOs that you work with. So.
Thanks for that intro. And Shannon, if you could describe the purpose and vision of your organization.
Sure. So Early Childhood Funders Collaborative, it's interesting. We've also been around just over 30 years, and we also are similar size. We're about 70 members, but we've grown really rapidly. We were just a few dozen members, not, maybe 5 years ago, because we are a highly relational group, really tight group of funders that are focused on early childhood philanthropy to produce like systems and policy change in early childhood is really our focus, more than say direct services. And in more recent years, we just have a new strategic plan. It's almost a year old, so almost celebrating its first birthday. And it's taken our focus in a more strategic direction. Some of our pillars now are emboldening our early childhood funders to advance racial equity and justice, to create conditions for policy and narrative change, and to build relationships not only between the funders, but also between our funders and folks in the field to better match up field interests and our members' interests to do the first two things, to advance racial justice and equity, and to move policy and systems and more public investment for early childhood.
Thank you. So Erik, if you want to hop on that question, if there's some new listeners to the channel, to the NAP channel, and just anything you want to add to that question of NAP and who you all are.
Sure. I think my esteemed associate, Brittany, did a great job sharing a little bit more, but we're really the main national advocacy organization in the field. We've been around for over 30 years, and we're really here to do, it's a pretty simple mission. We're here to increase investments by the philanthropic sector in tribal communities, but just as importantly, and so much of the work that we do with these two partners is to make sure that those investments are in line with our values as Indigenous people. And just, a little bit more on sort of how we enter this space, I think especially for those who are not in philanthropy world, NAP is sort of an interesting organization that has to sort of wear a lot of hats. So traditionally we're known as the, philanthropic serving organizations sector. So a lot of us are known as PSOs, the regional associations, the issue-based ones like Lisa and Shannon are part of. We really at NAP see ourselves as an advocacy platform to really be a place for tribal communities to advocate to the philanthropic sector about their priorities and what matter to them. But we're also a network of funders. So we really play a lot of those different roles. And I think a lot of what we've learned from some of these partners and sort of our own role in the field is where are we best suited to sort of build those platforms together and to support those funders who are also our champions on these critical issues like biodiversity and early childhood.
Yeah, thanks for that. So the next question I want to direct it to Lisa as well is, when as an organization did you decide or know that partnering across the field would be beneficial to achieving your goals? And I think that seems like an obvious question, but I know like when we were conversing and getting ready for this, some people had some really great insight. So if you want to speak to that.
Sure. So my organization is a staff of 8. And as you can imagine, we have a fairly broad remit when you think about biodiversity. We focus on other parts of the globe. So we have, areas, funders rather focused on the Amazon, the Andes, Chile, Mexico, and then sort of global conservation in general. But to do that with 8 staff, you really have to be fairly efficient. And, there's no other way we could accomplish what we seek to accomplish without partners, right? I mean, this is just, as you say, it's sort of obvious, but at the same time, it is really, I'm going to use an old phrase, but we really do, we are bigger than the sum of our parts when we partner across the sector. In my particular slice of the work, I focus on land and freshwater conservation and marine conservation, and primarily in the U.S. We have partners in different regions, but as funders begin to look beyond sort of traditional audiences and, move away from the, not move away, but let's just say, thinking more holistically and, more sophisticated really about their thinking about how to, address the biodiversity crisis, they are looking to communities and tribal nations, and they are wanting to build authentic relationships with partners in that space. Many mistakes have been made in this world. That the learning journey is definitely not over, but there's no way that Biodiversity Funders Group, or BFG as we call ourselves, could do that without partners like NAP. So that's been incredibly rich and valuable. And I think, when we realized that, I guess, was when there was just enough interest and a sort of snowballing need to think beyond our kind of narrow base of partners. Lucky for me, I had known Erik from previous roles. So we had a very trusting relationship, and we kind of, snowballed from there, right? We had some ideas, and it's really been, an incredible journey building this together. So, yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that insight. Shannon, what were you thinking about how, this whole partnership and the benefits of it?
So for us, it's similar in that we're small, so we've grown a lot. When I was hired at the very end of 2016, I was the first full-time staffer. Now, I don't want to neglect the wonderful work of the consultants that have been working on with the project in the prior 25 years, but as of 2016, there was one staff person. That was me, and I had never worked in a philanthropic context before. I had only worked in government. And so, slowly we have added staff at a slow pace. We have about 5 staff working on our core programs now. 2 of those are part-time, and then 2 folks working on a pooled fund effort. So we're still small. And we, think about all of the issues that affect young kids and families. That's all of them, right? And so, if you hear Early Childhood Funders Collaborative, I think a lot of folks, and in our early days, you might think, okay, that's preschool, that's childcare, that's basically early care and education, right? But that's true, and that is the origins. A lot of our focus in the early years was on those things. But I would say that one of the things we really aspire to is to think much more broadly about the things that affect kids and families, which includes economic forces. We have more folks interested in things like basic income pilots. I know folks have looked at, they're probably reading about this in the news. Some of you may be working on it. There are racial disparities in birth outcomes, in maternal health, and maternal mental health, as well as the education sector. So there's so many things. We could not possibly, with that small number of staff, cover all of those things. So we find ourselves constantly turning to partners to really look at the breadth of issues that are affecting young kids and families. And then we also have, of course, the regional associations of grant makers. We can't be everywhere. So a lot of times, one thing that I really value and like to do more is say, like, okay, I don't know how the regional associations of grant makers do it, quite honestly. Like, how do they cover all the things in their regions that their funders are interested in, right? But we specialize, even though I feel stretched, we do specialize, so we can be a conduit for them to bring some specialty information for folks in their region who are looking at issues particular to young kids. And I think, you heard me talk about the equity focus in our strategic plan, which means we need to be working hard with Native Americans in philanthropy, with Hispanics in philanthropy, with ABFI, the Association of Black Foundation Executives, to be sure that we're partnering as well. I would say the first partnership that really showed me, and I know we're going to dive deep, I think, on the partnership we have with NAP, but the partnership that really showed me the potential when I first got this job was a very deep partnership that I established with someone who's moved on, but was a vice president at Grantmakers concerned with immigrants and refugees during the family separation crisis, which was, of course, a family and young child crisis. And, we were very concerned, of course, about the horrible effects on young kids and families, but did not necessarily have the knowledge of and understanding of the processes and the immigration processes, and it was changing by the day, and who were the actors in that world, and who were the legal advocates, and of course we were funding a lot of trauma experts and child trauma experts and a lot of academics. And so coming together with GSER to work on how can we bring that together, right? How can we help your attorneys on the ground have access to trauma experts? Who is interested in funding those linkages? So that's like an example of one of the first things that for me was like, oh, I see how this can work now. As an example, before we get more deeper into what we're doing together with NAP, which is just our current best, most exciting partnership.
Well, that's good to know. So, I mean, I have been tracking NAP for a long time. I've worked with them on a number of issues or a number of events, and they just really set the bar for that strong collaboration, that strong partnership, leveraging those, and really reaching out to Indian countries. So, Erik, like, what is your sense in that whole, how do you partner across the field to make sure it's beneficial to everyone?
Sure. It's such a pleasure to be in this conversation today, because I feel like I've had pieces of this conversation at a lot of funder conferences, but I think it'd be helpful to just share a little bit about my journey in this space. So I grew up in Seattle, where my family still is, and I was a organizer and an activist in the urban Native community there. But then when I came out, I was also a queer youth organizer in the Safe Schools movement in the 90s. So organizing's always been in my blood. And when I've worked in tribal law and policy most of my career. When I stumbled into this philanthropic space, particularly this sort of PSO world, I didn't really know how to navigate it. And it wasn't until I started to realize that I could really apply an organizer's lens to this work that things really started to happen. And that's where some of these partnerships with Shannon and Lisa really popped for me, because a lot of it was, we had to do a lot of listening and learning. So we had a whole year where we went out and co-hosted conversations with tribal leaders and local funders and Native-led nonprofits to just hear tribes out about what's been their experience with philanthropy. What are the issues that matter most to them? We just actually recently shared a report out, which is on our website, with all the data from those conversations and what we learned from tribal leaders about how they've been navigating philanthropy. We have a lot of work to do, but most of it is bridge building, right? And so we know what those priorities are. They're definitely the environment. They're definitely early childhood. These are issues that we hear all the time, and we know Indigenous communities are doing some really incredible work to move those issues forward. But there's so much work that we need to do to educate funders about these issues, and then to actually work towards solutions. And that's really about, kind of that organizing approach, which is like mapping the power in the sector. Like you just heard Shannon sharing some of that really great example from working with the refugee and immigrant community, where you've got to think about who are you trying to influence? Who are the ones with the capability to actually provide these solutions? A lot of times that means public-private partnerships, which is a lot of what we do with both of these partners. With Lisa, we have something that we partner together called the Tribal Nations Climate and Conservation Funding Collaborative, where we bring their network of funders together with ours. We have a learning community where we really provide a platform to hand the mic over to tribal leaders and staff on the ground who are doing land and water conservation work. Where we have a pooled fund where we've been helping think about how we can have funders back things like non-federal match requirements to help access all this important new funding that's going to tribes. We even have a $102 million pledge that we've organized. And trust me, that was a joint effort of us sitting on the phone ahead of the White House Conservation Day to try to get as many funders as possible to commit to investing in tribally led conservation work across the country. And with Shannon, a similar thing. We really got to know those funders really well. And as she mentioned, those relationships really mattered. I think with both of these partners, if I had to say one thing that just was a natural fit for us, was the value of relationships, because we have to kind of teach a lot of the rest of the sector about this. But then you have partners like BFG and EC and Early Childhood Funders Collaborative who are very relational already. So when we came to that conversation, we built those relationships first, and there was trust there so that we could start to think about, okay, how do we actually bring like the federal partners into this, and to think about what kinds of solutions we can have for children and families and the environment. And that's sort of where that came from there. So that really helped me navigate it. And I have to say, both of these organizations have helped me think about a much bigger organizing strategy. I feel like we're barely scratching the surface now in this space, to the point about the regional grant making associations. That's the same feeling for me. We've got some fantastic like regional partners that bring all these funders together who care about all of these issues, but then, you know, they're all over the place. So like, how can we work together to start coming up with some regional strategies, some specific work that we've done to really highlight and lift up what's worked. So, you know, this is really just kind of the beginning for me. And I think there's just so much that I've learned in what it means to really organize in the philanthropy space for our people around their priorities. And we really need partners with the issue expertise and the relationships to do that effectively.
Yeah, thanks for that in-depth review there. The next question, I know you might have already spoke to it in the earlier questions, but I want to dig a little deeper, like, and start with Shannon. Like, why did you choose to partner with Native Americans in philanthropy? And I know you've spoken to that, but if you could just if you want to add more to that.
Yeah, I would really love to talk about that, because I'm so grateful for this partnership. And I feel like this story is going to center myself a little bit. You asked, why did you? Okay, so I'm gonna do that and then try not to do it too much. So when I took this job, you know, in philanthropy, remember, I had been in the government, and I was running a program for a while called the Child Care and Development Fund, and we funded 260 tribal grantees, but a lot of them were consortium. We reached over, at that time, it might be different now, 530 tribes total in consortia. Like, we had a really far reach. And then I took another job. I was the Associate Deputy Assistant Secretary for Early Childhood. That meant also had reach into all the American Indian Alaska Native Head Start programs, and the tribal home visiting programs were in our. So for a non-Native person, I don't want to claim any expertise, but I had some experience and just found like so much of the best work I was seeing was in these programs, right? And had this amazing 7 years of traveling around and seeing programs and seeing what was happening. So I got to philanthropy, and this should not have been surprising to me, because, you know, I grew up on the East Coast with regular American education, which neglects all these issues, but like, nobody was talking about this. Like, nobody seemed to know. And so, you know, in my first few years, you know, folks would call me, like funders, because I have a great job, and people call and say, what's going on? Like, I'm interested in asset-based. And I would say, let me tell you what is the best asset-based thing I have ever seen. The best asset-based thing I have ever seen is Native early childhood programs, where they're like, they've got language and culture, and, you know, it's just amazing. Like, the way, and, you know, everybody's talking about asset-based, asset framing. And sometimes I'm like, what is that? Like, I'm like, then I go see these Native programs, like, oh, I get what they're talking about. Like, this is what they mean when they talk about asset. And so people are just like, that's nice. I don't like, that seems very niche. That's not what I'm interested in, right? Or people would call me and they would say, I'm interested in nature-based education. What can you tell me about that? And I would say, let me tell you about the best nature-based education I've ever seen. It's the Native early childhood programs. And there's so many examples all over the country, right? And they would be like, that sounds nice. That seems very niche. That's not really what I was talking about, right? And so like, this would like keep happening. And I'm like, okay, I'm not really sure what approach to take here. I want to build these bridges, but I don't know. And I would talk to folks in states where there would be, I would know, like, I'd pull up the map again, remind myself how many tribal nations are in this place. And I'd be like, how, you know, you've got this many tribal nations in your state. What are you doing? Some are doing some, you know, we had one really great champion in Hawaii. Fabulous, very well-esteemed member in our group. So we took our whole group to Hawaii, and we had a really good visit, deep Native Hawaiian language and culture. And so I thought we had planted some seeds, and we came back, and it was a little hard to figure out how to water those seeds. So, and then one thing that happened was, and I want to say this because I know you have nonprofit partners on these sometimes. So this is like a little thing for them, because this was something that happened that really helped, was American Indian College Fund, I think, knew somehow that I was interested in this, or maybe one of their funders told them. So they invited me. You know how sometimes nonprofits have funder briefings for folks who are funding them to tell them about their work? Well, we're not a direct funder, but they invited me to their funder briefing. And then I could see who was funding them. And it turned out that like about 5 or 6 of the people on the Zoom were my members, and I had no idea they were funding AICF. And so then I thought, oh, okay, this is my group that I can get started with. So then I gathered that, I emailed that group. I took down their names and I emailed them after. I'm like, oh, you're funding them. Are you interested in this? So we started to get together. But still, I'm non-native and none of those guys were native, right? None of those funders were native. And so then that still wasn't quite right, you know, and then I met Erik. And so this is sort of how we started building it. Erik and I were meeting at United Philanthropy Forum, and I don't even remember exactly how we decided to do this. I think that once I had that group that was kind of incubated through the folks that I met on that, like the folks on the funder briefing for AICF, and I'm like, oh, I do have people who want to do this. And then I got them together and I thought, oh, what do I do now? Like, what do I do with them now? Like, I found them. I don't know what to do. I don't think I'm the right leader. I need to find a native partner, right? I need to find a native partner. I can't do this myself. And so that's when I think we reached out to NAP and said, can you help us? You know, like, and I had put money aside in the budget for a consultant, a native consultant, which was great, but it still felt like us and a native consultant, we have fabulous consultants at Roan Horse Consulting, was not adequate. Like, we needed another leadership partner with us and with a consultant. So that's sort of the beginnings of how we got started.
Wow, I love all of that. And my ears perked up when you talked about Head Start and the importance of early childhood initiatives. And I'm a product of Head Start, where I had my aunt as the lead teacher and my other aunt as the assistant teacher in the classroom. And it was early childhood, in my experience, was so amazing here at my own tribe. So thank you for the work that you do. And that whole continuing to look for collaborations and what works and how you can even engage deeper. So that's awesome. Appreciate that. The same question directed to Lisa, like, why did you choose to partner with Native Americans in Philanthropy?
Thanks, Steph. And Shannon, with so many great stories in your origin story there. I really liked hearing about that. Thank you. So maybe a little bit of a different angle for us. You know, we think that the way Erik talked about his organizing skills as being helpful and sort of driving this part of his career, I feel similarly. I was a BFG member before I became a staff member. So when I was in philanthropy, I was a member and a board member. So I knew the organization pretty in and out. And certainly partners were part of things in the earlier days, a lot of government partners. And so we had a little bit of that background. But when I came back as a staff member, you know, it was pretty clear that there was some excitement and energy around the Biden administration's what's called America the Beautiful. That was sort of their, you know, brand, if you will, to talk about protecting land and you know, addressing the biodiversity and the climate crisis. So there were about 6 different prongs that they, you know, the administration proposed to invest in. And one of the ones that sort of had, you know, like neon sign around it was tribal and indigenous led conservation work. And, you know, my circle of funders that I work with, again, it's small, but you know, small but mighty. We like to think of ourselves. Many of them had been investing in you know, indigenous-led NGOs for a long time. These are folks who work in the West, so where, you know, tribal land is very prevalent, right? And a lot of relationships, you know, were in the making, but certainly not to the degree where we are headed now. So once we realized that this was going to be an area of real interest and momentum, there was a wide spectrum of knowledge among funders, right? There were funders that were still in the early learning stages. Oh, I don't think I can make grants to tribes, or what's the difference between an NGO, you know, an indigenous-led NGO and a tribal nation? I mean, they get that on paper, but just sort of what are the outcomes that are possible in each of those different audiences? what not to say. I mean, my gosh, think of all the mistakes that I know that I've made. Wanted to be able to share some of those, and not me doing that, right? Like that wouldn't be right, as you said, Shannon. I'm a non-native person. Certainly wouldn't be credible coming from me. And then one of the bigger things, and Eric and I talk about this a lot, is how to like break down the silos within my sort of limited world, right? So conservation, but yet, why are we talking about conservation and climate change in two different breaths, right? Why not think about approaching it from another direction? We've recently been talking about how we might shift the conversation to talking about lifeways. I mean, why not talk about salmon instead of dam removal, fish passage, culverts, right? Why not sort of flip the script a little bit? I think that's something I've certainly learned through my partnership with NAP. Is just the language means so much. So I think getting back to the kind of organizing piece, it felt like there was some real momentum and some possibilities to move the needle. I mean, my organization is not advocacy based. We are inching toward that, and I hope that we continue to do so. But we are a learning organization. We are a convening organization, and I feel like now there is some appetite to think about, all right, what are some outcomes we can come to collectively, right? Each foundation has land designations that they're after, or laws they want to see, or withdrawals from mining or what have you, right? But if we could actually band together and with our partner in NAP, I feel like a lot more could be accomplished. So I think Eric and I share that mindset a little bit. We can push the field, and I think we can do that in a way that's credible and authentic, and it isn't sort of, it's a little top down because it's philanthropy. I'm not going to lie, right? But hopefully we can bring people. We can kind of meet together and bring along, go along with the community. So yeah, I think, focusing on tribal nations, that felt like a little bit of a gap in the field. Again, there were funders funding Indigenous-led NGOs, and we certainly don't want to diminish that or have any, cost reduction to that or anything. But I do think thinking about how funding can go directly to tribes, because tribes are the land managers, right? They have the nation-to-nation, government-to-government status that is really quite different. And there is some learning, right? There's definitely lots of things that you could do wrong as a funder when you're going into that space. It's ever changing and complex. So I definitely could not do that without our partnership with Native Americans in Philanthropy. And as we continue to grow, I feel like the opportunities to make some more of these connections with policy change and maybe even legislative work, who knows? But I feel like that's really some exciting work on the horizon. So.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. It's really exciting to see the different ways of how do you flip the script, and how do you what is that language that we use to have those deeper conversations. So thank you for sharing that, Eric. As for NAP and these groups, why they chose to partner with you, what is the responsibility that you see yourself and Native Americans in philanthropy carrying?
Yeah, we have a lot of different responsibilities that we're very cognizant of every day. Kind of speaking to, I think, what Shannon said a little earlier. I mean, it's we're here as a platform and a circle for all Native people, all tribes, all issues. It's a pretty big weight to bear. We take that very seriously. I know my team and I talk about this a lot, that we have a heavy responsibility and an important responsibility, because there's a lot of funding out there in philanthropy and a lot that should be moving to our communities. But it's a tough sector. It was built in a way that was very extractive. It's Western. It's completely complicated. The biggest finding we heard from our tribal leader listening sessions across the country when we did those was, what the heck is philanthropy? So a lot of them might have heard of a foundation here and there, or maybe worked with a funder, but there's certainly no knowledge, nor necessarily should there be, about what this sector is or how to even navigate it. So we are that partner to. So we kind of play multiple roles. One is really listening to our own people and our communities to understand as best as possible both the priorities out there, but also to be as aware as possible as a national organization of all the incredible work that's being done by our communities across these issues, whether it's environmental leadership or leadership in early childhood and culture and language, the list goes on. We have to have that knowledge base and those relationships so that we're representing as best as we possibly can, knowing that perfection is certainly not achievable, being that resource for our people. And then the other part of it is really having to be a resource to the philanthropic sector itself. We are truly the bridge. And one of the most important things that we have to do is to connect with a lot of different funders from a lot of different kinds of organizations. Individual funders are very different than those working in institutional philanthropy, like private foundations. How you move issues, how you educate, all of these things are very different. And so, having expert partners that are focused on this every day, they're focused on the relationships, and they're also focused on the approaches that are effective. They know what works, like in early childhood, what works with the biodiversity funders. That provides us an opportunity to do that deeper level of education with the resources that we have, because I'm not going to be able to overnight go build like a whole team on early childhood, a whole team on biodiversity, all the different issues that we have. We really rely on these partners to do that heavy lift with us around the education. My biggest frustration when I'm dealing with philanthropy in the field is talking to nonprofits, is talking to tribal leaders when they have to be the ones answering the 20 questions about who Native people are and what tribes are. I think the least we can do as a sector in this kind of middle PSO space that we exist in is to take at least some of the educational burden off of our partners and do that deeper work together. So I think a lot of why these partnerships matter is that when they're long-term and they're committed, and we're really putting our capacities together as the Native organization, as the issue organizations, and thinking about that durability, there is a long-term commitment to Native communities that will, I think, over time, ensure that entire sectors of philanthropy are not only understanding at least the basics about who Native people are, but even better, have a trusted place to go and ask those questions that they may feel uncomfortable asking, know that they can go and relationships can be facilitated, but they're also going to be held accountable to what that means in community. It's building infrastructure. It's building infrastructure for good partnerships and good relationships. And so for us, that's kind of the biggest role and responsibility we have, is being a good relative to our own people, but also making sure that we're really facilitating these partnerships in a way that we know that the commitment is there, and that we set those guardrails up, not in a way that's sort of coming into a relationship saying, hey, we're skeptical of you, but really making sure that we're thinking about what the long-term viability is of these partnerships, so that it's not extractive and it's not just going to be some one-off. And that's certainly not been at all what we have with these two great partners. And so I hope that what we can do together now is to start showing the rest of the field how this can work for all sorts of other communities too. I feel like one of my goals in taking the helm here at NAP is I don't want to just be the indigenous checkbox in the sector. I want to show where we can lead the whole sector. This is where I think Shannon and Lisa have just been amazing in thinking about, Native people shouldn't just be looking out for themselves here. They should be leading the entire environmental field. They should be leading the early childhood field. How do we center their leadership in a meaningful way for the whole country? And I think that's how we're doing this work together, and that's really powerful for me.
Thank you for that. I want to encourage folks to ask their questions in the chat. Actually, we're going to address one now that's coming from Deanna. Can panelists share their thoughts or the role their organizations play in the landscape of funders who are funding climate and early childhood topics? For example, differences from federal funders. And if we can start with Lisa answering that.
Sure. Great question. There's a phrase in philanthropy, you've met one foundation. And I think that's really true. It's still true, right? Anybody who's ever raised money knows that the website on a foundation's website gives zero helpful information, right? They will all even admit to that, often very opaque. So one of the things that I think of in my role as being at least somewhat helpful is to try to connect funders not only to each other, but to the field a little bit. And so I don't actually interact with NGOs one-on-one that often. I think my job would be 4 times as busy, or more, 100 times busy. But I do know enough about what those NGOs are doing in their own coalition. So in some ways, I'm linking coalitions to coalitions. Well, that's just one aspect, I think, that makes it a little different. I think the other piece is that I do share, or I do sort of serve as connective tissue maybe between some of the public funding mechanisms and the private foundations, right? So, as I said, we're only about 70, 75 private foundations. That cannot do the whole work that needs to get done in biodiversity. So linking up with what the federal government is supporting. So we will often be called upon to reach out to our foundation members to share opportunities happening. And Erik's been incredibly helpful in sort of making those connections with us. So if, for instance, Department of Interior has some money from the IRA or, some other funding mechanism that can only pay for certain things, and they need the flexibility of private dollars to come in and say, pay for the fencing for bison, or, for staffing for a guardian program or what have you, right? That's something that philanthropy can support. And so while the dollars may not be as big, they are definitely more flexible. So that is in some ways my role, a little bit of a pipeline for those sorts of opportunities. And then also, to some of the NGO coalitions, right? So again, those are vast, but if I can do the help of breaking down sort of where the biodiversity funders are focused and what they care about and keeping track of where their priorities are, then I feel like I can help lift all boats.
Thank you. Shannon?
So I would echo everything Lisa said. I think everything she said is true about us as well, so I won't repeat those things. We're membership based, so we try to stay on top of trends in the field, and any of our members can call us up and they'll say I'm interested in X, and I'll say my understanding is the top practice expert is this person, and the research being done is with this person, and we do that kind of thing. But we also have a very limited amount of time that we can spend getting deep on things, right? So what our time and attention as a small staff that's proactive as opposed to responsive, we have to think about where are we going to spend our time on the proactive things as opposed to the responsive things. So we'll be responsive to members' interest on anything that I can do, I will do. But on the proactive things, we think about a few things. We think about the fact that there's not really, compared to most other countries in the world, we don't have a public strategy around supporting young kids and family. We don't have a family-friendly economy. We don't have a public early care and education system. And so we really lean in on funders who fund advocacy and helping them with that. And funders who fund, advocacy, organizing, and moving toward more public investment. So that's one thing I would say that distinguishes us from government funding. We're thinking about how to get more government funding and how to complement government funding. And that's sort of the funders we appeal to more. And then when we think about how to make choices about how to spend our time, I always think about what wouldn't happen if we weren't here, right? Like there's certain things I think that would happen whether Early Childhood Funders Collaborative existed or not. Like people would be I'm going to be honest, people would be funding pre-K research for 4-year-olds whether Early Childhood Funders Collaborative existed or not. I'm not sure some of this equity work would be happening if we weren't like gathering people and figuring out where we could push a little more. And so I try to think about that. I try to think about okay, if we weren't here, what wouldn't be happening? And I try to lean in on those things. And another example of that is our funders were funding a fair amount of advocacy and always have. And I love that. That's why I love my job. I love our members. One area we identified we were weak in, folks had not been funding, early childhood funders had not been funding grassroots organizing. And our public investment had not been growing despite all this advocacy for years and years. So about 4 years ago, we got some funders together and we put together our grassroots organizing pooled fund, and it's our only pooled fund. And we've seen a lot of growth in grassroots organizing. And it was a gap. It was to fill a gap. Like, oh, you guys, like, we aren't doing this. Like, and folks were a little reluctant. We're like, let's try to do it together. You know, and so that's where we try to act. Stuff that wouldn't otherwise be happening is how I feel like we can best work.
Thank you. Eric, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, just, I think our role is a little different, and that's why these partnerships really matter. And I mentioned it a couple of times. There's just a very different kind of function with groups like ours that are here to advocate for a specific community as like Native people versus really being able to bring those who are doing the work and also the experts in the work together around an issue. But I think one of the things that is really common is that we're here to try to come together, and one of the roles is about developing the solution. So what Shannon was talking about with the gap filling, that is so much of what we're doing together. One of the things that I know tribes particularly struggle with is that they're not supposed to be sitting there thinking about where all these like funds are supposed to come from or how they work, right? They're coming to us with visions about what they want to get done and often a lot of just basic challenges. So things like the match guarantee that we help support with our partnership with BFG. This is for the America the Beautiful Challenge, which is one of the biggest funding sources available right now through the federal government for tribal land and water conservation projects, or for conservation projects. We pooled a fund together, which was something that we could do on our side with the support of BFG. And then we developed an MOU with the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, which is administering those funds. And we basically just said, we'll guarantee the match requirement for tribes. It's the biggest thing tribes come and complain to us about when they're trying to access funds. And we were able to, in the last round, get about 30% of those dollars out to tribes. And we just announced last week, or the Fish and Wildlife Foundation announced that 40% of the most recent funding round went to tribal projects. And we've heard directly from tribal leaders that thanks for just doing one of the things that we've been trying to do, but they don't need to deal with all these technical things in the background, right? And that's where it's been such a joy. And we're doing very similar things around the Tribal Early Childhood Learning Initiative with Shannon and her team, and thinking about how can we bring these philanthropic dollars to communities so that they help those federal dollars work better around that flexibility and those things that that the restrictions are around the federal dollars. How can we be those sort of solution developers together by bringing both our technical expertise together with our networks and our partnerships with the federal agencies? So that part of my job is one of the things I just love in these partnerships, is really thinking about how can we reduce that burden for communities and really leverage our proximity to the kinds of resources that these funders bring to the table, but help them make sure they're investing those resources in the most effective way possible.
Yeah, I love that Native Americans in philanthropy is like just clearing the path and making a cleaner, direct approach to connect those funders to the work that's needed, and that you've listened to the tribes. That's very powerful. So thank you for doing that. So I want to jump to the next question, just question 6 for the panelists who have the questions in front of them, is what has been the biggest challenge you've encountered in navigating these partner relationships? And I'll start with Lisa.
Oh, Eric makes it so easy. Or maybe there aren't any. I don't know. I think when I was thinking about this question the other day, I think the biggest challenge for me and my organization is how to just make sure we're not taking on too much, right? I think our brains say go, 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 and we want to solve problems, we want to fill gaps, we want to get people together, we want all the government money to flow in the right way, right? But it is a lot, right? There is a lot in front of us, and resources are scarce. I mean, even despite our sort of partnership, collective power, right? So picking and choosing what really makes the most sense is always an issue. I mean, that's probably not rocket science to say that, but I would say, thinking about bite-sized pieces. I'm one of those people that loves setting out a big 10-year vision, but then all of a sudden feel really daunted by that and realize that, having maybe bite-sized, 1-year goals or thinking about milestones that are realistic. That's really, that's not even really necessarily specific to either one of our organizations, but because there's so much excitement around our partnership, I think, and I think Erik would probably agree with us. We get a lot of things thrown at us to say, "Hey, you guys, this is great. Can you do this?" Or, "How about a new pledge around A, B, and C?" Right? And of course we don't want to say no, right? So thinking about how we can do that in a way that we can be effective, not disappoint anybody, and also take on some bigger ambitious goals. So I think that's it. It's a fun challenge, but it is a challenge.
Great, thank you. Shannon, what are some of the challenges?
I think it's less a challenge in our partnership than a challenge in the work overall, which is the structure in which we work and the structure in which we're working with NAP is a work group of funders, like funders with interest coming together in a smaller work group. And here I'll make a little plug if there are any funders. I think right now, the members of the work group mostly are sourced out of the Early Childhood Funders Collaborative membership. If you are a NAP member, maybe you're a K-12 funder and you're like, I'd like to get into early childhood. We really want you. We want you to join, right? Brittany is behind the scenes, I think, on the backstage now. But Brittany and I, we'd love to have you join the work group. But so I don't know if NAP and Biodiversity Funders Group find this, but the thing with work groups is you can get stuck a little bit, right? Because you're learning. Like when you move from the learning to the action, like how do you figure out in the group when you're going in circles and when you got to just pick something and do it, and how big a thing do you pick to do? It sounds like you guys have been doing really big things. But so I think that's a challenge to figure out, and especially in equity spaces, and especially around issues that people feel like they're going to make a mistake, they don't know enough, they're gonna offend somebody. There's so many things that could go wrong, right? So you could get paralyzed. So I think that that's been a challenge. We've been doing racial equity work since 2018 really deeply. And we have a racial equity work group that's sort of separate and sits over all of our equity work at ECFC. And one of the co-chairs of that said something early on that we try to remember. And, she was like, you can learn and do at the same time because you're never going to be finished learning. So it's not sequential. You don't try to learn everything so that you don't make any mistakes. And you're like, it's not going to happen. You have to learn and do. So we try to remember that. But so we have this in all our work groups, and not just the equity ones. It can be about some totally technocratic health thing. And it's like, are we ever going to do anything, guys? Or are we just going to keep inviting guest speakers? And so I think that's one that has been a challenge. But in this work group, it was like, and I'll say thank you to our members of our work group, if any of them are listening. I sent one a thank you note yesterday for doing this, and thank you to NAP. There was a year where I was like, wow, is anything going to happen with this work group? Like we're limping along. And then this last year, we published 2 reports, which I would commend to you. They were similar to what Erik said about tribal early childhood leaders' experiences with philanthropy. And we've had 2 meetings, one with a public-private partnership, and one was, we took our entire member meeting last month of all of our 70 members, and the entire thing was entirely devoted to Indigenous early childhood. So we went from a year of nothing, like, is anything ever going to happen? Should we continue, to a blossom, right? So that was good, keeping the faith with that. But that's a challenge. And then I would say the other thing that's a little bit of a challenge is this isn't anybody's whole job, but it is a whole job. Right? This could be NAP's whole job to work on early childhood with us, and working on Indigenous early childhood could be our whole job, but it is neither of our whole jobs. Right. And so kind of figuring out, and calendar wise and staff timing wise, and is it going to sync up, and it could be a whole job, right? But it's not our whole job, and it's not their whole job. So consultant resources have helped, I think, with that. But that is something we've navigated it. We've done all this awesome work, but I think that's something we could continue to try to be proactive and bring more resources to the table to help with.
Yeah, I love the advice of the courage to take that imperfect action, right? To move the needle and to see that blossoming, even when for a while there it felt like everything was sort of stagnant and not moving. So I think all of us can learn from that nugget of advice. Erik, what are you thinking about the biggest challenges in partnering?
Yeah, I think those are some really good examples. And just to build on a couple of those points a little bit, to Lisa's point, yeah, I tell everyone, when you get something done effectively, especially in this sector, everyone thinks you're like a magical sorcerer or something. That's certainly the case with government partners. I'm really proud of what we've been able to get done together around some of this new federal funding. But all of a sudden, I think oftentimes partners then come to you thinking that you have like this immediate answer for all sorts of other funding streams. And it's like, we could barely figure this thing out. It's a good problem to have, but it's also about sort of controlling expectations. And that's both at the community level. I'm constantly having to try to be in dialogue with tribes and others to say, here's what we're trying to achieve. Here's what we have achieved. And so really keeping that communication open on our side at the community level is really critical, because I think, you can have those in the sort of federal side or even the state side. We've got partnerships with state legislators and others now, and thinking about public funding. They're looking to try to have solutions. The communities and the tribes on the ground are looking for these solutions. And, we can kind of only do so much on the time frame we have. So that's one piece. And then I think to what, Shannon was saying, I was just connecting before this conversation with Rose on my team, who's our director of tribal nations engagement. And she really does a lot of the core work here with Shannon's team on this. And, she mentioned that one of the most important things about that partnership is that UCFG has been able to slow down its processes when needed. And I think to kind of some of what Shannon mentioned as a challenge, I think that's another one of those good challenges that we don't see enough of, right? We all are trying to like run at this and get this stuff done. And especially when you come out of philanthropy or, sort of policy work or whatever, there's this sort of urgency that doesn't always match where the communities are at or where our people are in the network. And when you're able to thoughtfully be able to kind of slow down your own organization, which is not always easy to do, and we certainly appreciate that, then you see that blossoming, right? And you see that kind of work. And it's been similar with some of what I think we've been doing with Lisa and the Conservation Collaborative. A lot of it is actually what we learned is we've got to change this narrative. Lisa mentioned earlier this language issue. I would keep going out to tribes, and they did not know how to have a conversation with a lot of these funders, because when you talk to someone on the ground about what they're trying to get done, they're not thinking about the differences between climate and conservation. Like if you're conserving your marine and coastal area, but you're also having to move your village because of the issues around climate change, it's the same government. It's a lot of the same people dealing with the same things. And so once again, we have to start thinking about how our tribes looking at this work. What's that holistic frame that they're coming through? Because you're not literally able to have the same conversation. And so the fact that we've been able to start to build a lot of this narrative change work in with the funders, and that the funders are kind of doing that alongside us with our tribal partners on the ground, is really important, because hopefully this will play a role in the field and actually helping have a shared conversation that's more indigenous in its grounding, so that we can have those solution-based conversations together. So some of that stuff is like the challenges, but I think those are the challenges that we kind of like to tackle with these partnerships, which is really important because we embrace them.
Yeah, I'm just astounded that I just found out that y'all don't have a magic wand at Native Americans. I'm like,
I wish we did.
You've done so much great work. Yeah, there's that expectation, and managing expectations is it can be challenging. So thank you for that. We have another question from a listener or somebody who's tuning in live to Nat TV. What resources can a new nonprofit / organization take advantage of or be on the lookout for? So I will first start that with Shannon.
So I think one thing I would say is sometimes nonprofits, I think, and I guess I'd be interested if Lisa and Eric think it's the same way, because again, I have relatively limited philanthropic experience. Think that philanthropies work more like through open RFPs, that's the norm, and you should be like combing websites and that kind of thing. And I think it's a misconception that that's going to be the majority of it. My impression from the folks that I have met is it's much more likely to be relationships, and it's much more likely to be, and I have no idea what your your area is, what your region is, what your area of interest or what kind of work you're doing. But like, I think it's more about trying to meet the folks in your area who might have some kind of funding, whether that be a community foundation or a family foundation or a health foundation or whatever kind of group it is, and like invite them to see your place, talk to them, find out what they're interested in. I feel like that's really the way that people are. It's less about, oh, there's going to be this open call, and the open calls get a lot of press, right? If Mackenzie Scott puts out an open call, it gets a lot of press. So I would say it's more about cultivating the relationship. And the other thing is understanding that all of the foundations also have strategic plans, and they have strategic priorities. And that's what they are funding to, and that's who they've got to convince. So the one bit of research I think that does help is trying to figure out, like through looking at the websites, is like, wait, what are they answering to? Who are they answering to, and what are the things that they're trying to get to, and how does my thing fit into that? That's really all I think I can offer there.
Eric?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Antonio. I mean, I think, this is one of the most important things we're here to do. So, for those of you who aren't as familiar with NAP, we're a national network of a lot of different partners. So we're a membership organization. You can join NAP if you're a Native-led nonprofit. You can just join us. There's no cost, and receive all of our information and resources. So definitely encourage you to do that. But we also have member funders. We've got funders who are really heavily involved in our work. We're in the process of building out new networks of non-Native allies in philanthropy. We have a Native Professionals in Philanthropy working group. These are all the people that we're in relationship with, including these two partnerships here today. So a couple of things that we try to do. One is we're going to be building out some new resources on our website that will help you navigate some of those open funding opportunities. I would say to Shannon's point, though, I think that most of where we're here to help is to especially think about how to help you build those relationships. So I think a lot of what Shannon mentioned were really good examples of where, we'll first of all reach out. We're here to answer the phone and help talk through, what you're thinking about with your own organization. We do that all the time. It's also partly how we stay in touch with understanding what different nonprofits are doing in the field. But a lot of times it's, thinking through, where are the sort of networks you can be involved in. So these regional funder networks is one example that we're really connected with. These are all of the grant makers that are in different regions. They often have their own conferences, their own networking opportunities. We'll often co-produce events at those different conferences and think about any other ways that we can help build those relationships. So that's one thing. We have our own conference that we are very excited to relaunch next year. So in next April, NAP is going to be hitting the Twin Cities, and we're going to then make that actually an annual conference. And that's really a place where funders come together to really discuss some of the ways that they're investing in Native communities and how they can do even more. But also a lot of Native-led nonprofits and tribes are also part of that network. So it's a great opportunity to build relationships. And finally, I think a lot of what we try to do is also partner with some of our partners who are there to really help support Native-led nonprofits. So one of the new organizations in the field is the Native Ways Federation, which Carly Badhart-Bull, who serves on my board, is running. And they've got some fantastic resources like the new Give Native campaign that they've been doing with Giving Tuesday for the last couple of years, has really become an amazing platform for Native-led nonprofits around Giving Tuesday, which is coming up next week, believe it or not. And that's this amazing opportunity where people like NAP and others are sharing and supporting all the Native-led nonprofits out there to try to get as many donors and investors interested in their work as possible. And we've seen a lot of growth in fundraising for Native-led nonprofits, and we'll be continuing to support some of their work that they're building out too. So those are a couple of examples, but please feel free to reach out to us if we can help with anything as well.
Thank you, Eric. Lisa?
Well, I think not much to add. I mean, those were pretty thorough answers. I will say it is frustrating. I feel your pain as a former fundraiser, not necessarily, having full transparency. So that is something that we at BFG tried to do. We, really try to link up, emerging nonprofits and issues to our members. And like Shannon said in an earlier comment, trying to stay ahead of the trends in the field so that we can be sharing, who's doing the work. So yeah, it's always a challenge.
Yeah. Well, thank you for the question, Antonio. We continue to invite folks to ask questions. We will move on to our next one, though. Lisa, if you'll stay on, what would you like the philanthropic sector to know about about the partnerships and how they can support organizations that are working together?
Sure. So I had sort of three mini answers. One was keep supporting them. Funders, I know, do love partnerships in at least in theory, but really making sure that they continue to support, especially over the long term, right? I think it's always a trick to secure long-term funding. And so if there's that patience and maybe like not as much attention to outcomes. I mean, I think that on one hand, having just the support for the partnership is really important without necessarily having a deliverable that needs to happen by a certain date. That's sort of on one hand. On the other hand, I would say being, pushy when needed. I think sometimes I love the bold vision of our funders. Those are the folks that we talk to, probably the most regularly. And I do count on them to nudge, right? And to say, think bigger, or, hey, does this really need to take 2 years, maybe. So I guess really what I'm saying in some ways are two sides of the same coin, and which come really from having the relationship. So, I would say just stay close, keep those communication channels open, and keep the relationship going, because that really is, I think, how we can all build together. Thinking about our philanthropic partners as partners is a huge part of why I do this work, right? If it were just, I'm just a grantee and plugging along, in my own little vacuum, I wouldn't find it nearly as rewarding as I do when I have full, partnership with the foundations and their staff. So that makes it all worthwhile. And I think that shared thought partnership, or the, just the ability to bounce ideas off each other and know about what their desired outcomes are. And, maybe we can't always meet them exactly, or we can't always get there the way that they might like us to. Just, having the ability to have that open dialogue is super important.
Thank you. Shannon, what would you like the philanthropic sector to know about the partnerships and how they can support organizations that are working together?
I think Lisa did a fabulous job answering. I think the only thing that I would add to what Lisa said is when you join and support an organization like any of our 3 philanthropic support organizations, Eric mentioned earlier, like getting a little bit beyond this sort of trade association idea. We really want folks to push beyond that, because we feel like we're reaching a much broader swath of people than just the folks who might be directly contributing through a membership, but the grants, the membership dues, people who might give us grants to support a partnership like this are making that possible because there are aligned mission partners in really moving the whole sector toward all of these goals, including our goals of finding organizations that aren't getting the resources that they need to do the work, right? Like the number of stories, especially like we've got stories like this from a whole range of different partners across a whole range of spectrums of issues and underserved communities. But, most recently, because we just had this big conference about Indigenous early childhood, there was a story about a group that has been for 30 years been active and did not get their first foundation grant until the past 2 years. And it was $100,000, and it has like transformed the organization. And I love my DC based organizations and advocacy organizations where I'd be more likely to go work, quite frankly. But I also know that like they can pick up the phone and call the program officer when there's a crisis in DC and get $100,000 or $100,000. This native-led organization's been doing good work for 30 years, never had one grant, right? And so like when you're investing in partnerships like this, like that's the kind of mission that we're kind of trying to work on together. And it might not be immediate, but by joining a group like ours or giving a grant to a group like ours, like we're trying to push that kind of thing forward. And it's more of a mission driven kind of work.
Yeah, thanks for that. Yeah, I love that example of the kind of funding at 100,000 to directly to tribes can be transformative. And unless you're right there working on the ground, you can't see that. So it's good to know that's being recognized and being funded at that level. And hopefully there's more to come. Erik?
Yeah, I think.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I was just going to build on those. Some great points, because I think a couple of things from my side of things. Funders are the best advocates to other funders, especially in institutional philanthropy. And one of the things when we build these tight cohorts that have this affinity with each other, but have also been like bringing their own expertise and understanding that to the table to be real thought partners and strategic partners with us, is that they're bought in. They're part of this whole strategy with us, and they can go and rustle the trees to go find some new partners. And I think a lot of what we've been trying to do is to think about, when we're bringing our network of funders together, I think Shannon mentioned this earlier, with these other networks like ECFG and BFG, new partners are there at the table as well, right? And we have a lot of work that we can do to kind of build those. So that's, I think, one big part of it is how funders can really see themselves when they're part of these efforts to really bring others to the table and make sure they're investing in those resources. I think another one is just that there's a way to build movement in philanthropy. I didn't think there was when I first started, because it was always so bureaucratic and just never, it felt like the antithesis to like grassroots work to me. But when you do this slower work that we're doing in some ways, I think one of the reasons it feels like it's got these fits and starts, like Shannon mentioned earlier, and you've got this blossoming, is that you can really build a movement. And some of this is about, thinking about how can we support your work as member organizations of funders in trying to move your own agenda in your foundation. I've been amazed where some of this stuff has led now, where we have started with a really committed program officer who's in it. They're helping us figure this out. And then all of a sudden we're getting their executive team involved, and we're like co-producing things at other conferences, and we're writing papers together, and like all of a sudden the whole foundation is becoming a leader in this field with us, right? Because that one program officer was like, here's how I think we can leverage other parts of my team. And that's some of what's so critical about this too, is that when you're investing in these organizations and these partnerships, I hope that you'll also see us as partners in your day-to-day work as an individual funder too. So that's part of our mission, is just being a member organization and just really supporting those who are part of our network. But when we're bringing our networks together, we have even more power and capacity to kind of do that in a specific space like childhood or the environmental work. So I think just to keep that in mind too, as you're thinking about this, isn't just investing in like a membership, it's hopefully investing in a whole infrastructure that really supports you in your own work in this space.
Thank you. As you all know, we're heading into harvest time, and a time set aside to be thankful for many. Additionally, Giving Tuesday is next Tuesday, as was mentioned by several, on November 28th. Native Americans in Philanthropy has elevated and shared some amazing Native nonprofits through this space and other spaces that members of our audience can check out and assist. I want to extend that offer to each of you as well. Is there anything you can share that your organization may need, that your partners here or others beyond may be able to assist in? And I'll start with Lisa.
Thank you. I would just support the good work of all of the NGOs and communities that we, exist to serve, but that's maybe too squishy of an answer. I mean, I think Erik mentioned the pooled fund or the giving pledge that we share with, that we've helped to support with Native Americans in Philanthropy. So if anyone on this call is interested in supporting tribal-led conservation, those two vehicles are very exciting and active, and all kinds of wonderful outcomes expected there. So that would be my pitch. Thank you for that opportunity.
Yeah, Shannon?
Yeah, what I want to say is similar. Like, I will tell you, early childhood programs in Native communities, whether it be parent-based programs or family-based programs, early childhood education programs, these programs are amazing. And the thing that I didn't fully understand until I've been doing more work now with Native Americans in Philanthropy and been reading the reports that we commissioned is, I tend to think of them as, oh, it'll be really good for child development, and the child development angle will be better because it's Native language and culture based. Okay, now I understand the whole thing is about language, culture, and the community, and the education or the family work is the route to the language and the culture and the community and the healing, right? Like my priorities were flipped from the priorities of the Native communities themselves. But it's just so transformative on so many levels. It's intergenerational. It's healing. It's bringing people together in the community. And so I would just implore people to think about, if you're a funder and you have any interest in it, to think about getting into it. And we want to help you. I can't claim that I know everybody, but I can network my way to people who can help you, as can Brittany, as can Rose, as can Erik. So we want to help more people bring more money into that area. And, if you're like, I want to do that, but I don't want to join your work group, I don't have time for that, that's fine. We will help you. There are great people doing work that is underfunded. And, I think Tara Jean-Yaziment's amazing Native educator leader wouldn't mind me saying, she spoke at our conference, and one of the things she said was, I can't figure out why people aren't throwing money at these programs, not because of need in the programs, because it would be the funders themselves is like doing them a favor to be able to partner with this good work. And so that's what I would say is, like, this work is amazing. And we would love to help you fund it. We would love to help you find it. We would love to help you make relationships. And that's why we're doing this work with now. So we'd love to have more people at the table with us.
Great. Erik, who do you think we should be highlighting and assisting and supporting?
Well, I'm going to make a plug for Give Native, because we've been a great partner with Native Ways Federation. I mentioned that before, but we'll share some information in the comments. One of the things I'm really excited about that Native Ways Federation did this year was to really build a whole database of Native-led nonprofits across the country that are doing this incredible work. And you can sort them by the issues they're working on, where they're at. There's another one that Road Horse Consulting was helping with too in New Mexico, where you can navigate all sorts of incredible organizations. But Tuesday, we're all going to be trying to really create platforms for each other across Indian country. So I hope on Tuesday you can both, think about making your own personal donations to Native-led nonprofits doing great work across the country, but also just sharing the stories about the great work of the organizations that are going on out there. So that's one, I think, really important action to take. And then, secondly, just again, our role is multiple hats, and we're really here to be the biggest network we can, both of those Native-led organizations and tribes that are seeking resources, and then to be the biggest network we can for all of the funders who are committed to Native organizations. So partners like BFG and ECFG are critical in building that power and that those relationships to increase that funding. But we're always looking to broaden our network. So if you're not a member of NAP, please join us. We've got incredible programming like you've been seeing here that my team works on every day. We've got a research department, we've got NAP TV, also known as our member education series, and all sorts of other events that we do with partners like this. We do in-field engagements with funders to build relationships directly with nonprofits and tribes. And we're doing work across the country every day. So, if you're looking to engage on any of these issues, we've got a lot of ways for you to be involved. So the easiest way to start is to just join our network and join as a member of NAP.
Thank you. So as we wind down here, I want to give the panelists the final closing word. Our audience is largely funders with opportunities to change philanthropy through partnerships and Indigenous organizations and people throughout Indian country. What would be one thing you want to leave them with having a better understanding of or response to today? So we'll start with Shannon.
I think I have a deep sense of gratitude for our, not only our work with Native Americans in philanthropy, but for just how open and patient and sharing a whole variety of people have been with me in this work. And so I think that's just what I want to leave. Actually, I think I talked about how awesome I think that the work is and how much that I hope people will support it. But I think I'd just like to leave with a sense of gratitude for all the work that we're doing together. Thanks.
Oh, I love that. Thank you. Lisa?
Gosh, that I could say the same. I mean, this partnership that we have with Native Americans in philanthropy has been at times one of the the refuge for my work sometimes, right? So being able to have a colleague in the field, that I can kind of like share my ideas, but also that I can, maybe commiserate with or talk about the things that are more challenging. Maybe commiserate's a little strong, but let's just say, it's when we have our head scratching moments, like there's another person there that I can have, bounce those questions off of. So I do feel very grateful for that partnership. And I would just say, throughout the field, there's so much emphasis on outputs and getting the products out the door and getting from point A to point Z. But how we get there is super important. And I think those relationships are really what make it worthwhile. Some of these jobs are kind of weird and lonely, right? And so if we don't have colleagues in the field to be able to lean on and again, kind of share our thoughts with, that makes it a lot harder. So I do think we learn together and we're going to get to those goals a lot more, durably, and maybe even, maybe it'll be even quicker if we do have these partners at our side. So I'm grateful for that too.
Thank you. Eric, final words?
Sure. Yeah, there is a lot of commiserating. I'll just go ahead and say that, Lisa. I think it's a lot to navigate this space, and I think one of the things that I most value about this work that we've been doing is just really being able to build the kind of deep relationships with our non-native partners in the field that are really building power. I think I've just been amazed at the kinds of things that Native-led nonprofits and tribes have been doing over the last many years to really shift their own narrative. I think that so many people are starting to really come to tribal communities to see the value and what it means to really be connected to your culture and to really have a vision about where you're trying to go and all of those who walk before you. And I think more and more funders are beginning to connect to that, but we have to create the right space to bring those funders in. And I'm seeing that grow, and I don't think we can do that on our own. So I think the more that we have these kinds of partnerships, the more Native people are in those spaces and are leading with their values. And, I think slowly but surely, in a lot of ways, shifting the sector to be more in line with our values as Native people, but also hopefully, again, leading parts of the field that need some leadership in some spaces that haven't been doing things, I think, the way that they could be. So just really appreciate that you're partners with us in building those platforms, because it's creating new space where Native people didn't used to be at the table. And I think they're at the table in a much more meaningful way than they used to be. So much gratitude to both of you as well.
Yeah. Well, I just want to close and say thank you to our audience. Thank you to the audience who asked questions. Thank you to each of the panelists, to Lisa, to Shannon, to Eric. Thank you for the work that you do. Thank you for really shedding some light. I always learn something from moderating these panels. I wish everybody a great winter season, and we will see you back in 2024 with new MES series. And at this time, I welcome Brittany back.
Oh, thank you, Steph. And a big shout out and thank you to Lisa, Shannon, and Eric for their contributions. It is such a pleasure to work alongside you and learn a relationship together. We're going to say thank you to our NAP members and our audience. We could not do this work without you. And we really appreciate your continued support in our ongoing work, and in particular, your support on our member education sessions. As a reminder, this session is open to the public as a highlight of our member benefits. NAP membership is open to Indigenous relatives and non-Indigenous allies. If you are not a NAP member yet and you would like to learn more, please visit our newly redesigned website, nativephilanthropy.org, or you can email our colleague Rod Jacobs at rjacobs@nativephilanthropy.org. Relationships, community, and partnerships are imperative to the work taking place throughout the sector. I hope this is something you were able to pick up from our time together here. At NAP, relationships are foundational to Indigenous philanthropy, and we hope that that today has encouraged you on your journey and that you can walk away with a renewed commitment and energy to pursue meaningful partnerships. I want to share that NAP's conference will be April 22nd through 25th, 2024. Please mark your calendars. There is a save the date out, and we are actively soliciting proposals. You can see in the lower thirds that is our website for the conference, where you can find the save the date and our our breakout session proposals. So we look forward to receiving those. Finally, you should be receiving an email with a link to a short survey. Please take a few moments to share your thoughts. It should take about 4 minutes to complete, but provides invaluable feedback for these types of events and in planning topics you'd like to see in the future. Your responses directly impact the work and the themes of our member education sessions. In fact, it was your response to this survey that inspired our next session taking place in the new year. Please join us January 25th, 2024 at 1 p.m. Eastern, right here for Next Generation Now, an MES examining education and youth programming with special guests, members of our Native Americans in Philanthropy Native Youth Grantmakers cohort. Thank you again for joining us this afternoon, and have a happy, wonderful holiday season. Hello, Nimesa.